He risked everything to save a disabled woman from cops. Her gratitude changed his life. The diner had 31 people in it. Cornelius Webb would count them later, in the quiet of the ambulance, when his hands had stopped shaking and his jaw had swollen to the size of a fist and there was nothing left to do but remember. 31 people. Nurses still in scrubs from the night shift. Retirees with bottomless coffee. A mother with 2 boys who were coloring in the laminated kids' menu. A bus driver on break. A contractor. A pastor from the church on 15th Street who came in every Tuesday for the soup. 31 people. And not one of them moved. She was in the window booth. 73 years old. Silver hair, neat and close. A beige cardigan over a white blouse. Her wheelchair sat at the edge of the table and her hands, small, brown, spotted with age, were folded in her lap with the particular stillness of someone who has spent a lifetime learning how to be composed under pressure. Her name was Eleanor Marsh Cavanaugh. Nobody in that diner knew what that name meant. Not yet. The 2 officers had been at her table for 6 minutes already when Cornelius looked up from the grill. 6 minutes of questions she'd already answered. 6 minutes of a receipt dismissed, a story doubted, a woman treated like a problem that needed relocating. And in those 6 minutes, not one person in that diner had moved a muscle. Then Officer Moser leaned forward and put his hand on her wheelchair armrest, not touching her, not yet, but claiming the space around her, and Eleanor Cavanaugh's hands, those composed and folded hands, began to tremble. She looked out toward the dining room. At the 31 people who were all suddenly very interested in their plates. Her eyes were not angry. They were not even afraid, exactly. They were something worse than afraid. They were resigned. Like a woman who had spent 73 years learning that when rooms went quiet, it was usually because the quiet was aimed at her. Cornelius Webb pulled off his apron. Neither cop knew that the man behind the counter had done 3 tours with the 82nd Airborne Division. And neither of them had any idea that the woman they were humiliating was worth $2 billion. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you are watching from. And make sure you subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you absolutely cannot miss. Cornelius's alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. He was already awake. He dressed quietly so he wouldn't wake Petra. Work pants, undershirt, the faded grey hoodie with the cracked Ohio State logo he kept telling himself he'd replace. His body moved through the small apartment without light, around the laundry basket, past the stack of library books on the kitchen table, stepping over the creaking floorboard by the front door out of pure muscle memory. Coffee on. Receipt folder open on the counter. 6 weeks until Petra's tuition was due at Hollins Charter Academy. He had half of it. He needed the other half by the 15th. He did the math fast, the way he always did. $40 in tips on a good day. 2 evening shifts at the catering company downtown. The numbers almost worked, if nothing broke down. He wrote Petra's morning note on the back of an envelope. Breakfast is in the fridge. Take your inhaler. I love you. Don't be late. He taped it to the refrigerator at her eye level, the way he had every morning since she was 7. He thought about Renata for exactly as long as he allowed himself, 1 minute, standing at the kitchen window, watching Columbus wake up below. Renata had been the planner. Spreadsheets, savings goals, the vacation they were going to take when Petra turned 10. Breast cancer had taken her before Petra's 8th birthday. Quietly, then all at once, the way the doctors had warned them. 1 minute. Then he picked up his travel mug, the one whose lid didn't seal right, so he held it at an angle when he drove, and he went to work. Donahue's Diner had been on the corner of Reed and 15th for 41 years. The booths were forest green vinyl and the menus were laminated and the coffee was strong and the portions were honest. Any morning between 7 and 10 you could find nurses and retirees and bus drivers and construction crews within 10 feet of each other, which was more integration than most of Columbus managed before noon. Cornelius had worked there 3 years. He'd come in as a line cook and gradually become the kind of employee that places like Donahue's quietly depended on, the one who stayed late, who knew where the extra napkins were, who could de-escalate an unhappy customer without turning it into a scene. The manager, Clifford Bush, ran the diner with the energy of someone perpetually expecting things to go wrong. He tracked inventory like a hawk, hovered during busy hours, and had a habit of making phone calls in his office with the door almost but not quite closed. Cornelius didn't dislike Clifford. He just didn't trust him the way you trust someone who stands up. That Tuesday in February, Cornelius arrived at 5:45, tied on his apron, and started prep. He was pulling a batch of hash browns off the flat top at 12:15 when he heard Renee's voice change. Not louder. Just tighter. The way a rope sounds 1 second before it snaps. He looked through the service window. And he saw Eleanor Cavanaugh's hands begin to tremble. She had arrived at 11:43. Eleanor Marsh Cavanaugh was 73 years old. She had been using a wheelchair for 4 years, since the progressive neuropathy in her lower spine made walking not just painful but dangerous, a fact she managed the way she managed most inconveniences, which was directly, without complaint, and with a quiet ferocity that had unnerved people twice her size for most of her adult life. She wore a beige cardigan, plain white blouse, wool slacks. A thin gold watch on her left wrist, the one she'd bought herself the day her company crossed its first $100 million in revenue. No other jewelry. Nothing that announced anything about who she was or what she was worth. That was deliberate. She came to neighborhoods like this one, South Columbus, once a month. No security detail. No staff. No advance notice. She sat in diners and coffee shops and lunch counters and she listened to what people actually said when they thought nobody of consequence was in the room. She had done this for 30 years. It was, she privately believed, the single most important thing she did for her business, and more than that, for her conscience. She had ordered the soup and half sandwich. Paid in cash. Tipped Renee for dollars on a $12 bill. Then settled in with her paperback biography of Thurgood Marshall to wait for her driver, who had texted from the I-70 construction backup with a 20-minute estimate. She was on page 214 when the officers came through the door. She noticed them immediately. The way they moved, not the casual scan of men who'd come in for lunch, but the deliberate entry of men who already knew where they were going. Their eyes found her table before they'd taken 3 steps inside. They'd been told to come. She closed her book. Officer Glenn Prater was 46, heavyset, with a jaw like poured concrete and the particular ease of a man who had spent 20 years being the biggest authority in any room he entered. His partner, Officer Devin Moser, was 28, lean, with flat grey eyes that never quite warmed, even when his mouth was smiling, which it was doing now. Prater stopped at her table. We've had some concerns raised about this area. I'm going to need to see some identification. Eleanor set her book down with the spine up to hold her page. I beg your pardon. Identification. Routine check. I am a paying customer in a restaurant. My receipt is on the table. Prater looked at the receipt without picking it up. That doesn't tell me who you are. Officer, I have been sitting in this booth for 30 minutes eating a meal I paid for, bothering no one, waiting for my driver. I have done nothing to justify this conversation. We received a complaint. From whom? Prater's jaw tightened. He wasn't accustomed to being asked that question. Most people, when a badge appeared at their table, went quiet and compliant, especially people who looked like Eleanor Cavanaugh in a restaurant like this one. He felt something he would have called frustration but was closer to embarrassment. I need you to come outside with us. I am not going outside. I have not done anything wrong. That was when Moser moved. Quietly, without being told, he slid around to the far side of her wheelchair. Positioned himself between her chair and the aisle. His hand dropped to his belt, not reaching for anything, just resting there. A casual gesture that wasn't casual at all. He leaned down toward Eleanor's ear. Lady, I'm going to tell you something friendly. His voice was soft enough that only she could hear it. Nobody in this room is going to help you. So you can make this easy, or you can make it hard, but either way, you're coming with us. Your choice. Eleanor looked out at the dining room. At the 31 people who were all suddenly very focused on their food. The mother had pulled her boys close. The pastor was looking at his hands. Even the bus driver, a large man she'd noticed when she came in, had angled his body away from her booth. Her hands, folded on the table, began to tremble. Not from fear. From something older and heavier than fear, from the accumulated weight of every room she'd ever sat in where the silence was aimed at her. She took one slow breath. She reached into her cardigan pocket, the left one, and pressed the small pendant concealed there. Once. Twice. And then she looked up at the service window. Cornelius saw the tremble. He would think later about the exact sequence, what he noticed first, what registered, what finally moved him from watching to doing. He would think about it and never quite be able to reconstruct it cleanly, because it didn't happen as a series of logical steps. It happened the way training takes over in a firefight, the body deciding before the mind catches up. What he saw was this, an elderly woman, alone, in a room full of people, with 2 uniformed officers closing in around her wheelchair, and not one person willing to stand up. What he felt was something that didn't have a clean name. Not anger, exactly. Not courage, exactly. It was closer to the specific feeling of recognizing a line and knowing that if you don't cross it now, you will spend the rest of your life on the wrong side of it. He pulled off his apron. Pushed through the swing door. Take your hands off her wheelchair. The diner's noise didn't taper. It stopped. All of it, instantly, like someone had pulled a plug. Prater turned and looked at Cornelius the way men like him always looked at men like Cornelius, measuring, contemptuous, confident. Sir, go back to the kitchen. This doesn't involve you. It does now. Moser stepped away from Eleanor's booth and toward Cornelius. His hand was still on his belt. He moved with the smooth, unhurried aggression of someone who believed completely in the outcome. Turn around and walk back through that door, Moser said. Last time I'm asking. She paid for her meal. She's waiting for a ride. You have no reason to be at her table. I won't ask again. Then don't. Moser shoved him. Both palms, flat and hard, against Cornelius's chest. The force drove him 2 steps backward and into a table. A water glass went over. I scattered across the linoleum. A woman near the window gasped. The mother pulled her children out of their seats and moved them toward the back without a word. Cornelius caught himself on the table's edge. He breathed. He looked at his hands, open, flat, knuckles down on the table, and he breathed again. He had been shoved harder in Kandahar province. He had been hit harder by men who were actually trying to kill him. He knew what Moser was counting on, a fast, angry reaction. Something they could point to. Something that turned the story around. He straightened. Rolled his shoulders. Looked directly at Prater. Your partner just assaulted a civilian in a public restaurant, he said. I need you to know I'm noting that. Prater blinked. Something moved behind his eyes, the first edge of uncertainty, barely visible, there and gone. Nobody's going anywhere except you, back through that door. I'm not going anywhere. Moser grabbed his collar and tried to spin him toward the wall. Cornelius let himself be turned, then planted his left foot, dropped his weight, and used Moser's momentum to redirect the officer hard into the service counter. Moser's hip caught the edge and he went sideways, knocking a rack of coffee cups onto the floor. The crash was enormous in the silence. Renee, pressed against the wall with her back to the coffee station, raised her phone. Her hands were shaking. Her aim was steady. Prater charged. He was big and he moved big, lowering his shoulder, going for Cornelius's midsection. Cornelius stepped inside the rush, deflected the shoulder, and used Prater's own forward motion to pull him past and down to one knee. Stay down, Cornelius said. Please. Just stay down. Prater did not stay down. Mosa had recovered and had his baton free. He swung it fast and low and caught Cornelius across the left shoulder. The crack of it was audible. White static exploded up the left side of Cornelius's vision. His arm went half numb and he staggered into Eleanor's table. He looked up and found her eyes directly. Eleanor Cavanaugh was watching him with an expression he had never seen on a stranger's face. Something between grief and ferocity and a gratitude so raw it was almost unbearable to look at. "You don't have to do this," she said, low and meant only for him. "Yes," Cornelius said. "I do." He turned back. The baton came down again, and the world went white. He came to on the floor with Renee over him and the smell of coffee and blood in his nose. His shoulder burned. His jaw felt like he'd caught a door with his face. The diner's windows pulsed red and blue from the street. More officers had arrived, 4 of them, standing near the entrance in a line, saying nothing, watching with the careful blankness of men who had walked into a situation they hadn't been briefed on yet. Prater and Mosa stood by the register. Mosa held an ice pack against the back of his head. Prater's uniform shirt was torn. A sergeant spoke quietly to both of them, with the tight-jawed expression of someone calculating damage that had already been done. "Is she okay?" Cornelius asked. His voice came out rougher than he expected. "She's fine," Renee said. "She's been on the phone since almost the moment it started." The front door opened. Not a paramedic. Not another officer. A woman in her mid-50s, black, in a charcoal coat with the kind of tailoring that said money without needing to perform it. She was followed by 2 men in dark suits who had the calm, load-bearing posture of people whose job was to stand between harm and whoever they were protecting. The woman walked into the wreckage of Donahue's diner, overturned tables, shattered cups, coffee pooling on the linoleum, and did not slow down or look around the way a civilian would. She took in the room in one sweep and went directly to Eleanor Cavanaugh. "Mrs. Cavanaugh. Are you hurt?" "I am perfectly fine, Adiz." "Please see to the man on the floor." Adiz Obi, senior counsel and chief of staff at Cavanaugh Capital, licensed to practice in Ohio, Kentucky, and Washington, D.C., turned and looked at Cornelius with a rapid, precise assessment that lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then she turned to the sergeant. "I need the badge numbers of both officers who entered this building, the complete call log showing who filed the initial complaint and when, the name and contact information of anyone who spoke to your department before this response was dispatched, and a chain of custody declaration for all recording devices active in this space during the incident." The sergeant opened his mouth. "My name is Adiz Obi." She placed a business card on the counter in front of him without looking at it. "I represent the individual your officers just assaulted. I also represent Eleanor Marsh Cavanaugh, whose civil rights were violated in this establishment this afternoon and who is, as of this moment, the subject of a federal complaint I am preparing to file." The sergeant looked at the card. His face changed. Not slowly. Not gradually. It changed the way a room temperature changes when someone opens a window in winter, immediate, total, and impossible to reverse. "Mrs. Cavanaugh," he said, turning toward the wheelchair. His voice had dropped an entire register. "I want to assure you that what happened here today is not." "What happened here today," Eleanor said, without raising her voice even slightly, "is on video. I'd recommend you speak to your officers before you finish that sentence." Prater and Mosa, by the register, had gone very still. They had heard the name. They were doing the math and it was not going well for them. The 2 men in dark suits positioned themselves on either side of Eleanor's wheelchair, quietly, efficiently, like a door closing. The message was clean: this woman was never unprotected. She had simply chosen, today, to walk into the world without her protection, the way she did every month, because she believed in knowing what the world actually looked like. Today the world had shown her. And now the world was about to find out who it had shown it to. Outside, while paramedics worked on his shoulder, Cornelius sat on the ambulance's rear step and tried to reconstruct the last hour of his life. Eleanor Cavanaugh wheeled herself to the edge of the ambulance's shadow. "They told me your name is Cornelius." "Yes. Mine is Eleanor." She offered her hand. He shook it. Her grip was precise and firm, the handshake of someone who'd spent decades in rooms where it was a first test. "I want to ask you something. Why did you come out from the kitchen?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because nobody else was going to," he said. Eleanor was quiet for a long time. 51 years, she said finally. "I've been in rooms full of people who had every reason to act and chose not to." She looked at the turned earth where police tape was going up. "I had almost forgotten what the other thing looks like." The charges came 4 days later. Obstruction of official police business. Resisting. Adiz Obi told him, calmly and without drama, that they would not survive a preliminary hearing and that she expected them dismissed within the month. That was cold comfort at 5:47 in the morning when Clifford Bush called. "Cornelius, you know I think the world of you. But the insurance situation, the damages, and the way the police keep coming around asking, I've had 2 officers in here this week and I can't." "Clifford." "Yeah?" "It's okay." A long silence. "I'm sorry," Clifford said. And Cornelius believed him. He sat in the courthouse waiting room and did the math. 6 weeks to tuition. Rent due in 3. His shoulder was in a sling, partial AC joint separation, no kitchen work for 6 weeks minimum. The catering company had already called to restructure their part-time schedule. He had $847 in his checking account. The video had been picked up by 3 national networks and 11 local stations, and the headline kept appearing in different versions of the same sentence. Army veteran defends elderly woman against police. Faces charges. His face on every screen. His name in every caption. And somewhere across town, his daughter was at school. The black SUV pulled away from Donahue's diner at 3:47 in the afternoon. Adiz was in the front seat, already on a call, her voice low and precise as she worked through the list of things that needed doing before morning. The 2 men in dark suits rode behind. One of them had offered Eleanor the front, more legroom, and she had declined without explanation. She sat in the back with her paperback on her lap and watched Columbus move past the tinted window. After 7 minutes, Adiz lowered her phone. "The sergeant has agreed to cooperate fully with the documentation request. The complainant who called in the initial report is a property manager 2 blocks from the diner. I expect we'll have confirmation by tomorrow morning that it was coordinated with the precinct's community liaison ahead of the investor tour." "Good," Eleanor said. "The video already has 300,000 views. It will be over 1 million by midnight." A pause. Adiz turned slightly in her seat. In 22 years of working together, she had learned to read Eleanor's silences the way other people read words. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I'm fine." "Eleanor." A longer pause. Outside, the diner had disappeared behind them. The streets of South Columbus moved past, a laundromat, a church with a hand-painted sign, a barber shop with 3 men talking outside in the cold. "He asked me if I knew his name," Eleanor said finally, her voice quieter than Adiz had heard it in a long time. "The man from the kitchen. When he introduced himself outside the ambulance." She was quiet for a moment. "He didn't know mine either. And yet she stopped." Adiz waited. "I've had security details for 15 years, Eleanor said. Drivers, bodyguards, assistants. People whose entire job is to make sure nothing like today ever happens." She looked down at her hands, the hands that had trembled in that booth, that she had pressed together in her lap to keep still so the officers wouldn't see how frightened she actually was. "And not one of them was in that room when I needed someone. Not one." She was quiet for a long time. "For a moment," she said, even more quietly now, so that Adiz had to lean slightly to hear it, "I thought nobody was coming." She said it simply. Without drama. The way people say things that have been sitting on a chest for hours waiting for the right moment to be said. "I thought, this is what it is. This is what it feels like to be invisible. To be the woman in the wheelchair that everyone has decided is somebody else's problem." Her voice did not break. It had never broken in 40 years of business. But it thinned, just slightly, the way strong things thin under sustained pressure. 73 years old. $2 billion. Offices in 4 cities. And for 6 minutes in a diner in South Columbus, I was just an old woman that no one was going to help. The city moved past the window. And then he came through that door, she said. She looked down at the thin gold watch on her left wrist. The one she'd bought herself the day her company crossed its first 100 million. The day she'd proved to herself that the thing she'd built was real and would last. She pressed 2 fingers against the watch face. A habit Adiz had seen before, Eleanor's version of grounding herself. Reminding herself of what was solid. Find out what he needs, Eleanor said. Her voice had returned to its full register. Even. Precise. The voice that ran 4 city operations and turned industries. Not what he'll ask for. What he actually needs. And make sure he has it. Already started, Adiz said. Eleanor nodded. She opened her book back to page 214, where Thurgood Marshall was in the middle of arguing a case that everyone said he couldn't win. She did not read a single word of it for the rest of the drive home. He got the call from Hollins Charter at 2:15. It was Mrs. Okafor, Petra's homeroom teacher, and her voice was careful in the way voices get when they're managing something they don't want to alarm you about. Mr. Webb. Petra is fine, I want to say that first. She's physically fine. But we had a situation this afternoon I think you should know about. 3 boys in Petra's grade had found the video during lunch. By the time afternoon classes started, half the 7th grade had seen it. Most of the responses had been admiring, your dad's a hero and variations thereof. But 3 boys, the particular kind of boys who sensed where the soft spot was in any situation, had found a different angle. Is your dad going to jail? Does he know they're going to take your house? Is that why he did it, because you're poor? Petra had not cried. She had not gone to a teacher. She had sat at her desk for the remainder of the school day and said nothing to anyone, and Mrs. Okafor had only found out because another student had quietly reported it. Cornelius drove to the school in his old Honda with his arm in a sling and his jaw still swollen on the left side. He found Petra in the front office, sitting in a plastic chair with her backpack on her lap and her face arranged into the particular expression she wore when she was refusing to feel something in public, chin up, eyes forward, hands perfectly still. She looked so much like her mother when she did that. He sat down next to her. His shoulder screamed. You okay? He asked. A long pause. Are you going to jail? No. Mrs. Obi told you that. Yes. Another pause. She turned and looked at him directly, the way Renata used to look at him, with the full weight of her attention. Why did you do it? She asked. He thought about the 31 people. About Eleanor's hands beginning to tremble. About the look in her eyes when she turned toward the dining room and found no one coming. Because she was alone, he said. And she shouldn't have been. Petra looked at him for a long moment. Then she leaned over and put her head against his good shoulder, the right one, careful of his arm, and he held her in the front office of Hollins Charter Academy on a Tuesday afternoon in February while the video of him walking through a kitchen door played on screens across the country. The boys were wrong, she said quietly. We're not poor. No, Cornelius said. We're not. 5 days after Donahue's diner, Adiz Obi called him at 8 in the morning. Mrs. Cavanaugh would like to meet with you. Thursday, if you're available. She asked me to tell you specifically that this is not charity, and she will be irritated if you treat it like it is. Despite everything, Cornelius almost smiled. Where? The building was downtown, the kind of address he'd driven past 100 times without thinking about the inside. The elevator opened into a reception area that was quiet, clean, and decorated in a way that said money without performing it, the same way Eleanor Cavanaugh dressed. Adiz walked him through to a conference room with a view of the Scioto River and the grey February sky above it. Eleanor was at the head of the table with tea and the Thurgood Marshall biography. She looked up when he came in and nodded the way someone nods when something they expected turns out to be true. "Sit down, Cornelius." "Tea? Please. Tell me about yourself." Not the version from the news. He told her about the army. About Renata. About Petra and the asthma and the Hollins charter tuition and the $847 in his checking account. He told her about the community center idea, the honest version, not a pitch, just the thing he carried around in a notebook buried under medical bills and past due notices. The belief that there was a gap in his neighborhood that nobody was filling. Veterans coming home with nowhere to go. Families in transition with no infrastructure underneath them. He told her about walking through the kitchen door. About seeing her hands tremble. "I wasn't thinking about consequences," he said. "I wasn't thinking about the job or the parole or my arm. I looked through that window and there was this woman who needed somebody to stand up, and everybody in that room had already decided not to. And he stopped. I couldn't be one of them." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "That line you said, outside the ambulance," she said. "Because nobody else was going to. I've been thinking about it every day since. I want to tell you something about myself," she said. Not the version in the business press. Eleanor Marsh had grown up in Akron, Ohio. Her father swept floors. Her mother sewed from their kitchen. She was the first in her family to go to college, Ohio State, partial academic scholarship, cleaning offices 3 mornings a week before class. She graduated with a finance degree and went to work at a Cincinnati brokerage where she was, for 7 years, the only black woman on the trading floor. She was given the accounts nobody wanted. She was told, in every way available to people who never have to say the thing directly, that her ceiling was quite specifically located. In 1987, she took $14,000 in savings and a $30,000 loan co-signed by her father's church pastor, a man who had believed in her when every bank in the state would not, and started an investment firm focused on markets other people called too risky. Cavanaugh Capital now operated out of 4 cities and managed assets worth more than $2 billion. She had built it by understanding one thing that other investors consistently missed: the people the market wrote off as too poor to matter were, in fact, the most reliable people in any economy. They had no margin for failure. They paid their debts. They built slowly and held on hard. She had been in a wheelchair for 4 years and had not noticeably slowed down. "I come to neighborhoods like yours," she said, "because I need to see what's real. Not what my analysts tell me is real. Not what the data says. What's actually there." She looked at him steadily. What's actually there, in South Columbus, is a gap. Veterans coming home to nothing. Working families with no ground floor to build on. An entire community that the market looks at and says not worth the risk. She paused. "I disagree with the market. I'm not offering you charity," Eleanor said. "You should know by now I mean that." Adi slid a folder across the table. Inside were architectural renderings, a building, modern and purposeful, on a corner of South Columbus that Cornelius recognized immediately because he had driven past that empty lot 500 times and thought about it every single time. Cavanaugh Capital has a community development arm. We have funding, a site, and architects who have drawn preliminary plans. What we don't have is the right person to run it." She watched him look at the renderings. Someone who knows the neighborhood. Who has served. Who understands from the inside what these families actually need, rather than what outsiders project onto them. Cornelius looked up. "I'm offering you the directorship of the South Columbus Veterans and Community Resource Center. Salaried position, Adi's has the numbers, they're fair. Full benefits. A program development budget. And Petra's tuition at Hollins Charter will be covered in full as part of the compensation package, because I consider investing in the children of community leaders to be sound fiscal policy." A small, precise smile crossed her face. "You would also be doing what you were built to do rather than what circumstance has forced on you. Which is not an irrelevant consideration." He looked at the renderings for a long time. The corner lot. The building that could be there. One condition, he said. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. The center hires local staff, contractors, maintenance, food service, all of it. South Columbus people. Eleanor looked at Adiz. Adiz was already writing. Put it in the charter, Eleanor said. Officers Glenn Prater and Devin Moser were placed on administrative leave 11 days after the incident. The charges against Cornelius Webb were dismissed entirely at a preliminary hearing that lasted less than 20 minutes. Adiz presented the video evidence, the receipt, the call log showing no legitimate complaint had been filed, and statements from 4 witnesses including Renee, who had held her phone steady for 40 unbroken minutes. Prater retired 6 months later. Moser was terminated and is currently the subject of a civil rights lawsuit that remains pending. Renee got a better job at a restaurant downtown. She still texts Cornelius occasionally. Mostly food pictures and complaints about the weather. Clifford Bush mailed a check for 2 weeks of back wages Cornelius hadn't technically been owed, and a handwritten note that said he was sorry and that he hoped things went well. Cornelius cashed the check and put it toward Petra's inhaler refill. The South Columbus Veterans and Community Resource Center broke ground on a Thursday in April. The ceremony was quiet and purposeful, folding chairs arranged on the sidewalk in front of the lot, a podium, a small crowd of neighbors and city officials and veterans who'd heard what the place would be for and wanted to see it start. Petra wore her good coat. She stood beside her father and watched everything with the focused, evaluating expression she'd inherited from her mother. When the ceremonial shovel turned the first dirt, she looked up at Cornelius and then looked back at the building rendering mounted on an easel nearby. "There's your name," she said. He hadn't noticed it. On the rendering's lower right corner, the architectural credit block, someone had added, Cornelius H. Webb, founding director. He stood there and looked at it. "Dad." "Yeah." Petra looked at the turned earth. At the outline of what the building would be. At the corner of South Columbus that had been an empty lot for 11 years and was about to become something that lasted. "Mom would have been proud of you," she said. Like, really, actually proud. He didn't trust his voice enough to speak. So he put his good arm around her shoulders, and she let him, and they stood there together on a Thursday morning in April while a crew marked the corners of something new. Eleanor Cavanaugh was at the far edge of the ceremony in her wheelchair, in a deep navy coat, watching. When Cornelius caught her eye, she gave him the small, precise nod of someone who has seen what she came to see. Later, over coffee in paper cups that someone had brought in a thermos, he stood beside her chair and mentioned what he'd noticed. "You didn't say anything in your remarks about what happened at the diner." "No," she said. "Why not?" "Because what happened in that diner belongs to the people who were in it." She looked at the turned earth, at the corner markers, at the first physical evidence that something would be built here. "This is what I want people to see. Not the crisis. The answer to the crisis." He thought about that. "Renata would have liked you," he said. "Tell me about her," Eleanor said. And he did. For a long time, in the April air, with the city moving around them, he told her about his wife. There is a particular kind of Tuesday that doesn't know yet what it is. It looks like a 4:30 alarm. Like a travel mug with a lid that doesn't seal right. Like a note taped to the refrigerator at a child's eye level. Like an apron and a ticket rail and the smell of a grill going hot. It doesn't feel like the day that changes everything. They never do. Cornelius Webb went to work that morning carrying the same weight he carried every morning. A dead wife's memory. A daughter's tuition. A house that felt too quiet. A dream drawn on notebook paper, buried under bills, too fragile to take out in the daylight. He walked through a kitchen door and stood between a woman and harm because nobody else was going to. He didn't do it because he knew who she was. He didn't do it because he expected anything back. He did it because he had a threshold, and it had been crossed, and he was not the kind of man who could stand at a service window and watch something wrong happen and calculate his way into staying put. Eleanor Cavanaugh had spent 51 years in rooms full of people who calculated. She knew what she was looking at when she finally found someone who didn't. She did not waste it. He risked everything to save a disabled woman from cops. Her gratitude changed his life. But the thing that changed both of them, the thing neither of them could have predicted, was what the other person turned out to be. That day, Cornelius didn't just save Eleanor Cavanaugh. He saved the version of himself that life had almost convinced him to bury. Comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching from. Subscribe, because we'll be back tomorrow with another story that proves the most extraordinary things happen on the most ordinary mornings.